0.72. That's the average number of children a woman in South Korea was expected to have. The lowest number ever recorded in any country in human history. You need about 2 just to keep a population from shrinking. Korea was at a third of that. For years, that number did only one thing: fall. It fell so far that in 2006, an Oxford demographer ran the math forward and said it out loud. South Korea could become the first country to simply disappear. Korea became the warning the whole world pointed to. And then, quietly, for the first time in 9 years, it went up. This is the story of how a country falls that far, and what happens when the floor turns out not to be the end. First, how it fell, because Korea didn't drift down slowly. It fell faster than almost any society in recorded history. In 1960, the average Korean woman had 6 children. 6. Watch what happens next. By 1970, it was down to just over 4. By 1980, below 3. That collapse, from 6 children to 3 in under 20 years, took Britain almost a century and the United States more than 80 years. Korea did it in 18. At the start, this was policy. A young, fast industrializing country ran a national family planning campaign tied to its economic plans: fewer children, more growth. It worked almost too well, but the number kept sliding long after the campaigns ended. In 2002, it crossed below 1.2. In 2018, Korea became the first developed country ever to fall below a single child per woman. And in 2023, it reached that record low, 0.72. By then, the reasons had nothing to do with the old campaigns. Ask people in Seoul why they aren't having children, and you hear the same things. Housing, apartment prices that put a family home out of reach for young couples. Education, a private tutoring system so intense that families spend the equivalent of nearly $20 billion a year on it, with around 8 in 10 students enrolled. Work, some of the longest hours in the developed world, and a workplace that consistently ranks as one of the hardest for women to build a career and a family at the same time. None of these are about people not wanting children. They're about the cost, in money, in hours, in careers of having them. When each child feels that expensive, the math bends in one direction. And it isn't that Koreans stopped wanting families. Surveys still find most young people say they'd like to have children someday. What changed is the when, and whether the someday ever arrives. Marriage gets pushed later. The first child gets pushed later. And in a country where nearly all births still happen inside marriage, later very often becomes never. Korea's government saw the danger early, and it spent to fight it. Over roughly the past 2 decades, the country poured the equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars into reversing the slide. Baby bonuses, cash payments, subsidized childcare, housing help for newlyweds. And for years, almost none of it showed up in the numbers. The rate kept falling anyway. Now the turn. In 2024, the number ticked up to 0.75. A tiny move, easy to dismiss as noise. Except the next year it happened again. 0.80 in 2025, the highest in 4 years. The number of babies born jumped almost 7% in a single year, to about 254,000, the biggest annual jump in 15 years. And into 2026, monthly births kept rising, month after month, for nearly 2 years straight. So what changed? Part of it is simple arithmetic. A slightly larger group of women moved into their early 30s, the years when most Korean couples now have children. More women at the right age means more births, even if each woman's decision doesn't change at all. Part of it is timing. During the pandemic, weddings were delayed by the tens of thousands. In Korea, marriage and childbirth are still closely linked, so when those postponed weddings finally happened, births followed a year or 2 later. And part of it may be a slow shift in attitudes, helped along by years of government cash, housing support, and leave policies, though how much those actually moved the needle is still debated. Which brings us to the honest part of this story. A rising birth rate is not the same as a rising population. and Korea's population is still shrinking. More people die there each year than are born, and have, every year since around 2020. A birth rate climbing from 0.72 to 0.8 is climbing off a very small base. It's the difference between falling slightly slower and actually turning around. Korea is doing the first, not yet the second. Even with this uptick, the United Nations expects South Korea's population to fall from around 52 million people today to roughly 22 million by the end of the century. Less than half and far older. And demographers are careful to warn that the recent rebound might not last. The pandemic wedding bump will pass. That larger group of 30-something women will age out of their childbearing years. The number could easily start falling again. So this isn't a story with a neat, happy ending. Korea has not solved anything. What it has shown is subtler and maybe more useful. For years, ultra-low fertility was treated as a one-way street, a number that only ever went down, a country sliding toward an exit. Korea was the proof, but the last 2 years complicate that. The floor, it turns out, is not automatic. When the age structure lines up, when postponed lives resume, the number can move the other way. Not to safety, but away from the edge. The same Oxford demographer who once warned Korea could vanish now describes it differently. He calls Korea a country on the front line of humanity's adventure, because Korea is not an outlier for long. Look across East Asia and you see the same curve, just a few steps behind. Japan, the country that first made the world worry about aging, now sits near 1.2 children per woman and would gladly trade for its own past. Taiwan has drifted down toward 0.9. China, after decades of limiting births, has slipped close to 1 child per woman, and its population has already begun to shrink. Across southern Europe, in Italy and Spain, the line points the same way. Korea simply reached the future first, further down the curve sooner. Whatever it learns on the way down, and on the way back up, the rest of us will be reading closely. The country that was supposed to disappear is still here. Smaller, older, uncertain about what comes next. But its most famous number, the one that made it a warning to the world, did something no one was sure it could do. It went up,